Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest.
I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th president and your 45th.
November 7th, 2024, the This Is Who We Are edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C. From Yale University Law School and the New York Times Magazine in New Haven, Emily Bazelon. Hello, Emily.
Hello, hello.
It's nice to see your smiling face. And from New York City, just off basically 24 consecutive hours of being on different CBS programs, John Dickerson of CBS News. Hello, John.
That's right. Good day. Good day to you.
Whatever it is.
I couldn't figure out if it was morning, evening.
Yes, John says now gulping a cup of coffee. This week on the Gabfest, guess what we're talking about? The Republicans sweep the election. It's kind of a rout. Donald Trump wins a second term with surprising ease thanks to a surge of new voters, Black and Hispanic voters, male voters, urban voters. Why did it happen? Why was the victory so easy? Then what will the Republican return to power with an unfettered and triumphant Trump mean for the country and for the world? We will start that conversation. Obviously, it's a conversation that we're going to be having for the next 4 years and 3 months. Then what happened with abortion and with women voters? Emily's been looking deeply at that, as always, and we'll look at what happened with the referendums and how abortion and reproductive rights affected the election. Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter. And a reminder, look, I think probably a lot of people were surprised by the results, but even in a moment of surprise, there are still conundrums to live with. So
maybe
we're going to do
more
conundrums.
Yeah.
We have our live show at the Bell House in Brooklyn on December 4th, Wednesday, December 4th at 7:30. It's our annual conundrum show where we're going to tackle some of the questions of modern life. Probably some political, but mostly not political. Like, should you wash your socks inside out to wash your foot off, or outside out to wash the world off of your sock? Good question. I don't really know the answer. Which strongly held American belief has been more damaging to America, or maybe more beneficial to America? Rugged individualism, American exceptionalism, or meritocracy? That's a good one. Anyway, we're going to talk about that on Wednesday, December 4th at the Bell House in Brooklyn. Get your tickets at slate.com/Gabfest live and send us your conundrums at slate.com/conundrum. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by The Best Idea Yet. Have you ever wondered who created that bottle of sriracha that lives in your fridge, or how Birkenstock's 250-year-old sandals are still cool enough to be in the Barbie movie, or in my closet for that matter? Or why nearly every house in America has at least one game of Monopoly? Introducing The Best Idea Yet, a new podcast about the surprising origin stories of the products you're obsessed with and the people who brought them to life. Take Super Mario, the best-selling video game character of all time. He only exists because Nintendo couldn't get the rights to Popeye. And the McDonald's Happy Meal, that idea first came from a mom in Guatemala. Every week on The Best Idea Yet, you'll discover the surprising stories behind the most viral products while picking up real business insights along the way. We guarantee you'll dominate your next dinner party after listening. Follow The Best Idea Yet on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to The Best Idea Yet early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus. Donald Trump easily defeated Kamala Harris in the presidential election this week. He will perhaps have a small majority of the popular vote. She may have won the popular vote, but he will have a quite large, by modern standards, majority in the Electoral College. He wins every one of the swing states, the battleground states, and across the country, in every county and every state, practically, more voters went for Trump. A higher percentage of voters went for Trump in 2024 than they did in 2020. We're in Trump's America again. This is not some kind of aberration. In 2016, I think we all knew who it is that we were voting for or not voting for. We knew what we were getting. The people who voted for him knew what they were getting. So, Emily, because John has been thinking about this and talking about this endlessly, I'll give you the first crack at it. Like, what was your immediate reaction to the realization that Trump was going to be our president again?
The widespread gains suggested to me that there are a lot of people who are feeling really frustrated. I mean, the numbers about the country going in the wrong direction are high. And I think underpinning that is hardship from inflation and a sense of frustration about the government not helping and not solving problems that also involves the border. And then some like cultural alienation that, Trump made lots of ads that reminded people of ways in which they think the Democrats are like out of touch and extreme on cultural issues. Unfortunately, he did it by, turning transgender people into scapegoats. But I think that's what he was sort of tapping into, that larger feeling. And in light of all of that, the counter message from Democrats that Trump poses this real threat just didn't really resonate with people. And I think you could see this in a lot of interviews with voters, that to say to voters like, this person who already was the president, who maybe you have good memories of your economic status during his presidency, but like, oh, wait, you can't elect him again because he could do all these bad things. That just like didn't move enough people. And, in retrospect, I think that feels less surprising. While as it was happening, it seemed like, well, maybe it will, that maybe it would have the intended effect. But I think that, Kamala Harris kind of stuck to a relatively cautious message. She didn't break with any of the Democrats' more progressive stances. She didn't clearly say how she represented change as opposed to Joe Biden. And that was another really striking stats from the exit polls. I know we're supposed to treat them with caution, but people who said that but when people asked which candidate represents change to you, they overwhelmingly picked Trump. And that just seems like in the end to be kind of the lesson of how you saw these swings that took place, in cities as well as rural places and suburbs in a way that really cut into the Democrats' traditional base.
John, so many different kinds of voters went for Trump in surprising ways. I think we saw Hispanic men moved 33 points towards Trump. Black men voted for Trump in relatively large numbers. Non-college women stuck with Trump exceptionally well. First-time voters swung towards Trump in huge numbers. 64% of first-time voters in 2020 went with Biden, but Harris only got 45% of those voters in 2024. So 19-point swing away there. So which of those do you think? I don't know. I don't even have a question. I mean, just like statement. John thought.
Yeah, right. And these are all based on the exit polls, which Emily rightfully says we should be nervous about. Although in this case, the exit polls seem to have told a kind of consistent story throughout the night, and the story they're telling is not inconsistent with the county level data and even the county level data and precinct level data, which shows Trump doing better, including sometimes winning, in areas all across the country. So even in areas where Harris won, Trump improved over his 2020 positioning, and Harris did less well than Joe Biden. I guess the thing that struck me the most, and we'll get to this in the later topic, was just that I think the final pass of the exit polls has Harris. She got 53% of the female vote. Biden got 57% in 2020. Harris only won by 8 points with women. Biden won with 15 points. That was supposed to be, you knew that Biden was going to make some inroads across education level with voters of color. Although I think in the end, actually, Trump did not improve his position with black voters or black men nationally, but in states like North Carolina, he did. So in the battleground states where it mattered, he did do well. And so you knew he was going to do well in those. So where was Harris going to outperform? Was it going to be with women or with senior voters? She did a little better with senior voters. She did a little better with white college-educated voters, but she did not do better with women. And that was, to me, important and interesting. And we'll talk more about that later.
Were we just completely wrong about the fundamentals of this election the whole time? I think there was a sense when inflation was rampant. I remember feeling like, man, this is Carter-esque. Inflation is bad. Inflation is terrible. People hate inflation so much. And even so, it subsided by the time the election came around. Inflation right now is running, at kind of average levels. But the hangover of it, even though the economy is growing, stock market is booming, there are jobs aplenty, the hangover of inflation is enormous. And we have seen that damage incumbent parties across the world. This is a point that Matt Iglesias, for example, makes over and over again, is that incumbent parties have gone down both on the right side and on the left side around the world after these inflationary episodes caused by the post-COVID chaos. And were we just dumb not to focus on that the whole time?
I don't know, because I remember you saying many months ago when we were talking about COVID, I was saying, it's I understood why, but it was kind of amazing that Democrats could not talk about COVID in a way that that was more successful in drawing contrast with Donald Trump. In other words, his management of the pandemic. And you said, yeah, but they can't because people are feeling the effects of what happened in COVID in their lives with inflation. And which was, of course, totally right. And then I think there's a secondary part of it, which is the sort of anti-elite anger at both schools and masks is also a part of the election. So I think it was. I mean, my feeling was the fundamentals were always bad. The anti-incumbent feeling, Biden's low approval rating, the fact he was had particular difficulty on the economy, and the fact that when it comes to beating back against public perceptions of a bad economy, it's always extremely difficult. I can't think of a single example where an administration has tried to change people's minds on the way they feel about the economy. So even if he talked all day long about how well things were going, the question, though, always was, sure, all of those fundamentals exist. But Donald Trump is a particularly powerful problem, has a particularly powerful problem. One, all of the January 6th moral lapses, all that stuff, the felonies, the convictions, and abortion, which in the off-year election, people said, oh, economy's terrible, the Democrats are going to get pounded. And then it turns out abortion motivated a lot of voters to vote for Democrats despite the economic conditions. So I always felt like the fundamentals were there, but Donald Trump is a historically unique kind of candidate to be running against. And that's what makes fundamental determinism perhaps not so strong.
But I feel like 2022 turns into, for the Democrats, a bit of a trap, right? It's a different electorate, a more engaged, more educated electorate. And the Democrats threaded a needle where, they did badly, except in battleground states. And so that allowed them to hang on to the Senate. And I feel like part of the illusion, which turned out to be a delusion going into this election, was that you could just kind of keep churning ahead steadily. I mean, first of all, it affected the decision that Biden stayed in for so long, right? And then I think it affected how Harris ran. And, I remember reading some things a few months ago, this is not the way that she's going to run up the score. She's not doing the things that would seem to be more than eking out a victory. And now it seems obvious that she wasn't even doing enough to hang on to parts of the Democratic coalition.
What do you think could have been done given the circumstances, given that she's stuck with being the vice president of incumbent, that she actually could have done based on the actual results that could have changed anything? I
would ask the same question. Yes.
So I think there's two ways to answer that question. One is really nothing, and they needed a different they needed a different ticket that could have really divorced itself from Biden and dumped him credibly. And that didn't have some of the weaknesses from 2019 and 2020 that really dogged her in the ads, right? Stances she'd taken then that just don't play well now. A second answer, though, is that she should have figured out a way to really separate herself from Biden. It would have been awkward and weird. Yes, she's the vice president, but, look, she ran, I think, a strong campaign in which there were very few mistakes. But sometimes you don't win by not making mistakes. And also the mistake that she did make was having no answer for how are you going to be different from Joe Biden, who that in retrospect, this is someone with a below 40% approval rating as president.
But she could not credibly make that argument as that candidate. You know what also she could have done is not be a woman. I think this country is so freaking sexist.
I'm gonna
I think it's a real problem.
Well, it's possible that you're right, but we don't have a lot of evidence for that right now, David, because we have a lot of women voting for Donald Trump, and also there is going into this election a body of political science evidence that actually people are ready to vote for women. And the thing that if it turns out that there's evidence for your view, I will completely eat my hat and lots of other things lying on my table. But the problem with jumping to that conclusion is the consequence is we don't run women for president anymore. And I'm already think that that is a likely outcome from this, but I'm really loath to buy into it, especially just given if that's true, why was the gender gap so much bigger in Biden's favor than it was for her? I don't know. There's just something odd to me about that argument right now.
As a general principle, I think, first of all, we may not know what the most data-backed, intelligent way to think about how this election happened. We may not know it for months, if not years. You could imagine, it's undoubtedly multifactored. Anti-incumbent, Biden, inflation, et cetera, COVID for sure. You get the point. Gender may be a thread in that explanation. It just may not be very big.
Also, if the election had been really close, but it wasn't that close. And so there were a lot of factors. Yeah. And it's I don't know, this idea that there's this, of course there is sexism and misogyny in American society. Believe me, understand that. But that it was the determinative factor here. I don't know. There are a lot of other obvious things to point to. The Democrats didn't close the border until a minute ago.
It's not a determinative factor. It is just, I'm saying I would say it is probably a significant factor. And the fact that Trump, who is such a grotesque macho sexist in this very particular way, did so well at mobilizing men and young men is unsettling as hell. And that's not saying people were voting against tariffs. They were voting for a vision of masculinity that is a completely repellent vision of masculinity.
Well, that is a really good point. But connected, it supports your argument. I concede on that one.
Oh, the other things we should probably throw in the mix, though we don't know their size, is obviously the penalty for violating norms, even a set of norms that were distinct from the violation of norms that Trump participated in his first 5 years on the scene. That penalty was not big. And also, there was, the nostalgia factor, which is Trump is more popular now than he was at all during his presidency. And also, when you look at the exit polls and ask people, do you think more favorably about the past than about the future? The Trump voters were, by a pretty good amount, more sort of past focused, thinking that the past was better than the future. So that's some element of the stew as well.
Not just the norms that did not count against him. It's the felony conviction and the criminal indictments, which he did not have in 2020 or in 2016, but which now he is a convicted felon, and that he bore no penalty, as far as I can tell, for that. So it's really astonishing. John, I wonder if you could quickly just look at the Senate and House, which have followed along, although in the House, if Republicans end up with a majority, which they probably will, it will be, fairly narrow one. They won't have had a sweeping set of victories. And in the Senate, they will have 53, 54 seats, winning some of the contested race, losing some of the other ones. Were there patterns in the congressional vote that you think are interesting compared to the presidential vote?
Only a little bit of, and this is still being figured out, but where there were sort of, in Arizona, the Gallego Trump voters, or those in those states, Missouri, voting for abortion rights, but also voting for Josh Hawley. Anywhere that you had those kinds of results is interesting. The takeaway from the House may be that billions of dollars were spent, and the makeup of the House might be identical to what it was going in, or close to it. So a very narrow Republican majority. The Senate, what intrigues me about the Senate is Donald Trump will come back into office with a Senate controlled by his party, but very different than the Senate he faced in 2017, which included people like John McCain, Jeff Flake, and Mitt Romney. The members of the Senate are much more Trump aligned. This election, as you pointed out at the beginning, David, confirms the idea that Donald Trump is the most transformative figure in the Republican Party, certainly more transformative than Reagan, even though Reagan came in with 12 Senate wins for Republicans in 1980. So Trump won't come close to that. But in terms of reshaping an entire party, the Senate that he will face is a Trump Senate in a way that it was not in 2017. That'll be true in the House, although the House was quite Trumpy already. So that will change, and we can talk about the ways it will. But that's the biggest thing that strikes me, and just defines part of why this was an extraordinary comeback for him. Think about Donald Trump days after January 6th, and then Donald Trump after the losses of 2022. He was, by lots of people writing lots of articles saying that's the end of Donald Trump, and obviously it clearly wasn't.
I mean, another thing to point out is that 53 senators is enough for probably easy confirmation of Trump's nominations to, lots of important positions. Marco Rubio has already said that the Senate will be deferential. The two Republican senators left who might cause issues, Murkowski and Collins, that's two is not enough if there are 53. And another point to make is even if Republicans only have a very narrow majority in the House, that means there will be no investigations, no congressional investigations with subpoena power of the things that are happening inside the Trump administration.
Can we linger for just a second on what Bernie Sanders said immediately after the Democratic loss? Sanders came out and said, basically, it should come as no surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. That was the lead of what he said. And I tee this up both because I wonder what you guys think about it. And then also, one of the things that we're trying to do is figure out what the objective explanation is for what's going on. Parallel to that is an entire industry of people in the left who are both trying to figure out the genuine answer, but then those who are basically using the outcome to affirm their priors. And some people are basically think even what Sanders said, which is that this is the Democratic Party's fault, is itself a controversial statement, because there are a lot of other Democrats who would say this is all, Donald Trump's fault, the American people's fault, the press's fault. And I wonder what you thought of what Sanders had to say.
I mean, I think that it's the right focus to think about working class, non-college educated voters and low income voters, which Democrats lost in a way that was different from 2020. I just am not sure what they're going to come up with as the prescription for getting them back. And I'm not sure Bernie Sanders, who never has had majority support, is the right person to turn to for that.
A note on this. Look, obviously, he is right in the sense that working class voters and low income voters went with Trump. But if you look at the party that does, what's the party that will protect Medicaid? What's the party that has backed unions and unionization? What is the party that has, protected public schools, which is a place that, is a place of opportunity? What is the party that has opposed tax cuts for the rich? It's the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is the party that is trying to do the things that would help the economic well-being of poor and working class Americans. Poor and working class Americans don't seem to appreciate that or feel that what they're doing is helpful, or they don't associate with the Democratic Party. But I think it's a little bit weird to say the Democratic Party has abandoned poor and working class Americans. The Republican Party has abandoned poor and working class Americans, except rhetorically and culturally, where they've seized on it. And I don't know that there's a way for Democrats to occupy that same cultural space that Trump is so effective at occupying.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, here's a more positive spin on these shifting demographics. Like, could it be that it will push the Republican Party to actually be more responsive to the space? Like, if they want to hang on to those people, do they continue to have exactly the same favor the rich policies that they've always had, or does that shift them in some meaningful way? Like, actually fighting for those voters in a way that would benefit those families could be a really good thing. Second related point, if this coalition continues to morph in this way, it's no longer really going to be in Republicans' interest to try to shut down enfranchisement all the time. Like all of
100%.
And that
100%.
Well, that would be really good. I would be really happy to be able to stop worrying so much about voter suppression and, allegations of cheating. I mean, we're not going to hear anything about that, right? Like all of the concern that we all had that we were going to spend weeks litigating this election and the results could be subverted, like ain't going to happen. And maybe there is a larger lesson here for Republicans that could actually just like calm everyone down about the actual mechanics of democracy. And that would be a real relief going forward, because the most important thing is that we have more free and fair elections in the future. And, this is like the uncertainty that Trump has injected with his more authoritarian talk.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by ZBiotics. After a night with drinks, it's tough to bounce back the next day. But with ZBiotics, there's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Also, ZBiotics is continuing to invent probiotics that will help with everyday challenges of modern living. Go to zbiotics.com/Gabfest to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Gabfest at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/Gabfest and use the code Gabfest at checkout for 15% off. Support for the Gabfest comes from USA for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. People facing war and violence are now facing winter far from home in temporary shelters with little to keep them warm. As humanitarian needs in Ukraine, Afghanistan, Syria, and beyond increase, ensuring continued funding to help the most vulnerable is more urgent than ever. You can help. Donate today to help keep families safe and warm this winter. UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, works around the clock to support the most vulnerable throughout the year, providing blankets, cash to buy warm clothes, fuel for heaters, and shelter. It's during the winter months that your support makes all the difference. Help protect refugees and people forced to flee as they faced winter far from home. Your gift is matched for a limited time. Give now at unrefugees.org/winter. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Simply Safe. If you're ever worried about the safety of your home and family, there's no better time to act. Right now, you can get 60% off a new Simply Safe security system, their best deal of the year. Simply Safe is the home security you need for the peace of mind it brings, knowing your home is protected 24/7. And right now, Gabfest listeners can get 60% off today just by visiting simplysafe.com/Gabfest. Trust Simply Safe to provide home security, customer care, and peace of mind. Simply Safe's Active Guard outdoor protection agents can see potential intruders in real time, talk to them directly, set off your spotlights, and call the police before they break in. Plus, with Simply Safe, there are no long-term contracts, no cancellation fees, and it only costs around $1 a day. Simply Safe is offering Gabfest listeners exclusive early access to their Black Friday sale. So right now, you can get 60% off any new system with a select professional monitoring plan. This is their best offer of the year. So head to simplysafe.com/Gabfest. That's simplysafe.com/Gabfest. There's no safe like Simply Safe. So there's a phrase I've been saying a lot to people in the last couple of days. Don't borrow, worry. Don't borrow, worry. Because there's obviously, perhaps going to be stuff to worry about in the next months and years. But don't worry in anticipation. Don't make yourself crazy about what might happen. On the other hand, if you're a Ukrainian who's fighting Russia, if you're a government employee, if you're somebody who works in Jack Smith's office, if you're somebody who depends on Medicaid, for example, there's probably a lot to worry about. There's probably a ton to worry about. If you're somebody who imports things which are about to face a huge tariff, there's probably a lot to worry about. So let's use this next segment to talk about where we think the country will go in the next few years. Obviously, completely remains to be seen. We have no idea who Trump is going to hire, how he's going to govern. We only have the sort of the things that he said and the evidence of his first term. But Emily, you spent a lot of time looking at the possible implications for the courts and for criminal justice and for prosecutions. What do you expect to see in that in a second Trump term?
Yeah, I mean, I have concerns about the rule of law going forward based on all the threats that Trump has made about prosecuting his enemies. And, we'll see. I already see quotes out there, and there were a few skeptics among the many experts I spoke to that, like, this was a lot of bluster, and now we're going to find out. I do think we can count on Trump to have nominees to crucial positions who are on his team in like a really clear way. I mean, the thing I feel like he has been the most emphatic about is his frustration with the people he appointed who stood in his way and wouldn't do his bidding, like including Bill Barr, who was like a deeply conservative and in some ways I would argue like close to corrupt attorney general, but in the end, like parted from Trump. So that's going to be the dynamic, the kind of who he picks for which positions and what those people do with their power, I think is like huge going forward. And you mentioned federal employees. I mean, he has talked about reissuing an order that he issued at the end of his first term and Biden rescinded. And that order would have made it possible to fire, tens of thousands of people in supervisory positions across federal agencies. And that's the kind of like really dramatic decimation of federal agencies that would be way beyond the ordinary kinds of changes that Republicans make when they come into office.
That being the Schedule F. I wonder also whether in covering all of these gambits, there are all the things Trump said, and there's plenty of evidence that what he says he then follows up on. So, the Muslim ban would be a good example, but he does not follow up on everything he has said. It's so, and I think part of that is just like laziness, and it's a busy job and it's hard to get in the way. So I think one of the challenges for all of us thinking about this is both to see what he's actually proceeding with and what he's not as a way of focusing on the true changes that are happening. And then also to put forward a set of practical results of what he would do. So for example, if we're talking about Schedule F, it's both you remove some expertise from the government in the agencies and people who've been studying the issues that they deal with at length. You remove institutional history. You create a chilling environment or a fearful environment in which people need to be held accountable for their actions and motivated, which has always been a challenge with civil service. But this swings the pendulum too far. And also, by the way, when you hire for loyalty and not for issue competence, you end up replacing the existing bureaucracy with a bureaucracy that exists, and we saw this in the response to COVID, not to handle the issues at stake or not to work hard to figure out what's going on, but to create things that cover up for any problems or that make the president look good or whatever, essentially focusing everybody's attentions on loyalty and public relations, which is not what you want in expert positions.
Right, and also that corrupts data. One of the things that the U.S. government has been especially good about is having pretty reliable data about the economy, about the weather. And if that data can no longer be trusted, it really puts a crimp in a lot of people's work. And it just makes, it makes the government less competent and makes people's ability to understand what's actually happening in the world harder. One of the things, John, to your point about it's not hard to know what he'll focus on is one of the notable qualities of the first Trump administration was that there was clearly a set of people in the administration who prevented things from happening, not by literally blocking them, but just kind of like slow walking it or making disappear. Like Trump would say he wanted to do X and Y. And then John Kelly, at least as John Kelly tells it, would say like, oh yeah, we'll look into that. And then just like it would kind of disappear. And I think what will probably not be the case now, he's going to be surrounded by true yes men. And those yes men, when Trump has a desire to paint Toledo orange, like that's what he wants. That there's going to be somebody who's going to be like, I'm going to get all the orange paint in Ohio and get on painting Toledo orange right now because that's what he said he wants. And so the space between Trump's vocalized desire and action has probably gotten much tighter than it was in the first administration, because in the first administration, there were these people who were like, if we just don't say anything about it, he might forget about it.
It reminds me of what Kissinger said about Watergate, is that, Nixon told some staffer to go do something and the damn fool listened to him. And one thing we'll hear, and we heard this from J.D. Vance and others, which is, but that's the way it's supposed to work. I mean, how dare someone not do what the president suggested? As if the presidency is the only executive position in the history of organizations in which the executive has perfect knowledge and perfect wisdom. Part of a functioning presidency is that you have and surround yourself with people who are all rowing towards the same goal, have the same values, but who recognize that all humans have blind spots, and particularly overworked, stressed, and high pressure executives, and that sometimes the snap decisions of 78-year-olds are not always in the best interest of the Constitution and the country. And if you've removed, when you think about the things that have been removed that traditionally constrain presidents, all of whom want to act and do, adventuresome things, tradition constrains them, norms basically, the laws constrain them, getting reelected constrains them. All of those are gone in Trump's case. And I wonder also, you mentioned, Emily, the House control meaning no investigation. If how the Democrats choose to respond to Trump, I wonder if that will be chilled by the election. When that theory goes like this: if Democrats conclude that the breaking of norms is not something that's politically sellable or advantageous for them in the political marketplace, will they be as critical of Trump because it doesn't work with the voters? So is this really useful for us to be as critical as we might otherwise have been?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Another thing I wanted to ask you guys about is the military. So obviously, Trump was in control of the military for 4 years already. And one thing we learned is he doesn't seem disposed to be a warmonger. That is not his impulse. And in fact, I think, you talked already about the Ukrainians, David, but we're likely to see him abandon them and then further weaken NATO. And yet, what worries me about the military is another sort of problem that we got close to in the first term, but turned back from, which is calling troops into the streets to quell protest. And I feel like there are a bunch of things Trump could do to kind of rile up the resistance. And it could be that the resistance is going to be really important, and, protest and civil disobedience, a real tool. At the same time, the president does have a lot of power to call troops into the streets. And so I wonder if that kind of confrontation, which really does lead America down a more authoritarian path, is something that he's going to do something to kind of create the conditions for.
I hope not. Can we just talk through what I think of as being the top 5 or 6 things that he has said he's going to do? So he is going to put tariffs on basically every import. It is an overwhelming theme, popular among his voters. It's something. It goes back to something he absolutely did in his first term. So we will have tariffs on essentially all imported goods. Probably. And
isn't that going to be immediately bad for the economy and bad for consumers?
Hugely bad, hugely inflationary, hugely inflationary.
Right. I feel like actually this is maybe a big failure, was that there wasn't enough attention to this during the campaign. Not that nobody talked about it. Anyway, I'm confused about how that's actually going to play out, though.
There was pretty good amount of attention to it. It's just that people are right. I just don't know that people press it.
And also when people hear tariffs, they think it's the Chinese are going to have to pay. But it's not really the Chinese. It's stuff that's made in Mexico that the tomatoes you get from Mexico, all the parts that are made for American cars that are made in Mexican factories and come over the border, and then the assembly is done here. The stuff from, the wood from Canada, everything. There's an enormous amount of the economy is just stuff that is imported and not from enemies. It's imported from countries that are fundamentally super close allies of ours.
If nothing else, it's going to be highly disruptive to the economy. And so you're talking about although the stock market seems to have responded quite favorably to Trump's election, probably based on the idea that essentially it's going to be a low regulation, low tax environment. And companies like that. But I feel like there are 4 economic shocks that he has to manage. Many of them he will be initiating. One is these tariffs. The second is the deficit picture. The debt and deficit picture will only get worse. You've got artificial intelligence about to completely rewire the employment picture in America that will require lots of help for those people being churned through that. And then immigration. I mean, if you get rid of all of these migrants, who's doing the constructing of the buildings that you talk about making new housing for, and all the other work that migrants do in the American economy, and all the other beneficial effects of migrants, not to mention the cost of actually deporting them. So those are four things that, even if they work out beautifully, there's going to be considerable economic churn.
Yeah, and also the deporting millions of people who are very productive, generally low-wage workers will also be hugely inflationary.
I don't think they're going to do it. I just don't think they can pull it off. That is one prediction I have. Not that there won't be some kind of symbolic gesture toward deportation and a lot of suffering, yes, and fear. But
fear and suffering, yes.
Yes, but like actually mass deportation is just like a tremendous organizational lift and has all the problems you both outlined. Anyway, we'll see.
So you think it's basically this term's version of the wall?
Yeah, I do. I mean, look, I could be completely wrong. It just, when you think of what it would cause and the ripping apart, like, I don't know if people really have the stomach for that. And yeah.
Okay, so there's tariffs, there's immigration, the other economic shocks John talked about. I think on foreign policy, the pullback from NATO, the giving Israel a free hand to do whatever the hell it wants, probably in the Middle East, but also helping the Saudis, also being in the pocket of the Saudis as well, and then completely pulling back from Ukraine and leaving Ukraine to negotiate the terms of its surrender with Russia. That's going to be really, really sad. That moment is going to be very, very sad.
And are there going to be other implications for Putin gaining more power? Like, that creepy relationship worries me.
And then what decision does China make based on that move? What do they decide to do about Taiwan based on what they see as Trump's and Vance's pretty, telegraphed opinion or telegraphed behavior on Ukraine? And
then I think the other category where we're going to see an enormous amount of damage done to the country, and we talked about this in the undermining of government, the undermining of trust in government, but kind of hand in hand of that is going to be a huge amount of corruption. We already saw that Trump was willing to use government to benefit himself and benefit his friends. You can see in this relationship to Elon Musk Elon Musk is going to gain enormously in certain ways from whatever's happening in the Trump presidency. But I think there will be a line of people waiting to get certain kinds of contracts, get curry favor in certain ways, so that they get to do what they want with government funding. And that's just going to be depressing and lower trust in government and make government less competent and make people less trust in the system that has guided us for 250 years pretty successfully. Also, the bicentennial or whatever, the 250-year anniversary, Trump will preside over that, by the way.
The other thing to bring in is just like the hatefulness of this campaign, like especially in the end, it was so dark. It was about attacking lots of individuals and groups in this way that is like just tough. A bad environment for kids to grow up in, listening to their leader behave in this manner. Like, there's just a cost to that.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by BetterHelp. November is a month that's about gratitude, but there is sometimes one person we don't thank enough: ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we're trying our best to make sense of everything. And in this world, that isn't easy. Practicing gratitude can improve your personal well-being, and you might find it beneficial to learn gratitude-building techniques from a therapist. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp can help you tackle life's challenges by providing accessible and affordable care that's entirely online and that's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. With BetterHelp, you can message a professional therapist anytime, anywhere. So let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/gabfest today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/gabfest. This episode of the Gabfest is brought to you by Public.com. Did you know you can lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at Public.com? The Federal Reserve announced a big rate cut, and there could be more rate cuts this year and in 2025 as well. That's good news if you're looking to buy a home, but it might not be so good for the interest you earn on your cash. So if you want to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high yield and investment grade bonds, check out public.com. It only takes a couple of minutes to sign up. And once you lock in your yield, you can earn regular interest payments, even as rates decline. Lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at public.com/political gabfest. But remember, your yield is not locked in until you invest. Brought to you by Public Investing member FINRA and SIPC. As of September 26, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed, not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosure/bond-account for more info. This episode is sponsored by the NRDC. The planet is changing at an alarming rate, but the blame doesn't fall equally on everyone. Just a few corporations are responsible for a majority of the pollution. The Natural Resources Defense Council is fighting to stop polluters in and out of court because the survival of our planet and humanity depends on it. Donate at nrdc.org/podcast. You'll back their team of lawyers and scientists and keep them fighting in and out of court to stop polluters and protect our one and only planet. There's a reason why the Wall Street Journal said they're the most effective litigating group on environmental issues, because when they have your support, they win. Donate at nrdc.org/podcast. Let us talk about abortion, reproductive rights, the abortion referenda, how women voted. So Emily, probably the biggest abortion ballot initiative was in Florida, where 60% of voters were required to vote for an amendment that would codify abortion rights in the Florida Constitution. Only 57% voted after a huge campaign by Governor DeSantis, Republican Governor DeSantis, to encourage people to vote against it. So that amendment will not be codified. Florida will retain its very strict 6-week ban. In other states, in Arizona, Missouri, Maryland, Nevada, abortion initiatives did pass. It will protect abortion rights to a certain extent in all of those states. So what was the valence of this? It was in 2022, this issue was enormous in the midterms. Was it enormous this time?
Well, there were two things happening. There were these state ballot initiatives, most of which succeeded in protecting abortion rights and expanding them in some states. And then there was the Democratic Party, and especially Kamala Harris, running on abortion as a top line issue. And obviously, Harris's defeat and really Trump's victory and what he could do with the office to diminish abortion rights is the top result. I mean, I was interested in like all the press release emails I was receiving this week from abortion rights groups. Like, they were sad. It was not the state ballot initiatives passing that was the headline. It was like, we are in big trouble with Trump as the president and this, likely Republican Congress. So I think there are like lessons here. I mean, I've been really interested in the state ballot initiatives because they root abortion rights so directly in the democratic process, right? Like, this is really different from Roe versus Wade. You have 9 judges making a ruling that creates a constitutional right. It was solid for almost 50 years. And then it was fragile to have it all resting basically on the base of the Supreme Court. The democratic process, incremental and expensive and burdensome as it can be, seems like it could be sturdier in the end. Once you start enshrining abortion rights in state constitutions and voters have approved them with these ballot initiatives, you're just talking about like a different political reality. At the same time, the idea that abortion on its own or primarily is going to lift Democratic candidates out of all of the morass of economic hardship and discontent we were talking about, I think has proved to be a mirage. And it actually never had that much power. I mean, it was true that in Michigan in 2022, I think their abortion rights amendment helped flip the state houses to Democrats for the first time since the 1980s and maybe helped Whitmer a bit, although she also had a lot of strength on her own as a candidate. But generally, I think that, no one issue really is ever going to be able to have that kind of power. And when you looked at the polling among the electorate at large, not Democrats, about what the most important vote issues were, abortion was low on the list, right? It was like the economy and healthcare and immigration and even like housing. I mean, lots of things mattered more. And so I think that was that's a fundamental limitation to the way that abortion plays out in our politics.
Protecting democracy was the number one issue as far as the exit polls were concerned when you asked people what was the most important issue for you overall.
Wait, people generally or Harris supporters?
Both. It beat the economy by 1 point, and it was the number one issue among Harris supporters. Now, I should hasten to add, the reason I don't like that "what is the most important issue to you" question is that it conveys the idea that you took 100 voters and they all had a clean think and used their wisdom to decide what to you is the most important issue. What it often really is what's the composition of these 100 people? So they Harris voters or Trump voters, and they're telling us essentially what their candidates have emphasized. And I hate that because all you're doing is just telling me who a Trump voter and who a Harris voter is. You're not using the wisdom of the people to tell us what we really should be focusing on. So it's a bit of a misdirection.
Emily, as you were building up to this, you were saying that the most consequential fact is that Trump has been elected and there's a Republican Congress. Why is that consequential? In particular, as relates to medication abortion, I'm very curious, like what is it that a Trump administration, what are the various things a Trump administration could do to make medication abortion more difficult? And will it involve the Postal Service?
Abortion pills have become an enormously important way for people to continue to access abortion, even in states with bans. They're getting mailed, in a kind of like quasi-legal way, all over the country. And when you look at the numbers, even in states with bans, in most of them, the number of abortions has actually risen slightly since Dobbs, the court's 2022 decision. And a large reason for that is access to the abortion pills. Okay, so if you're an abortion opponent, you care deeply about trying to cut off this access. And the federal government has a lot of power over access because everything is going through the post office, or a lot of things are going through the post office. And also because one of the abortion pills, mifepristone, has the approval of the Food and Drug Administration, both to get prescribed generally and also to go through the mail. So, a big priority for abortion opponents is going to be an FDA commissioner who will try to reverse that approval process and change the status of mifepristone. Women can use other pills, misoprostol, another drug, to have an abortion with medication. So it's not going to completely cut off access, but it's still significant. And then the other thing is the Comstock Act, which is this 1873 statute, hasn't been enforced since the 1930s. But on its face, it says that it is a federal crime to send through the mails, or like UPS and FedEx, any item associated with causing an abortion, anything. And so we haven't enforced it in these many years because it has just seemed like a total anachronism from the past. But it could come back. It is entirely within the power of the federal government to start opening people's mail, surveilling them, prosecuting doctors in blue states who have state law protections, but not federal protections, who are prescribing this pill, and women who are receiving it.
Could a U.S. attorney in Texas prosecute a doctor in New York?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, they would need the reason that this weapon has not been used against providing abortion is that the federal government, this almost for a century, has chosen not to pick up the weapon, but it's sitting there. And
how much of the mailing of medication abortion pills is done from the U.S. and how much of it is done from abroad? Because could people get around it by getting this sent from abroad? I mean, the U.S. mail can still be interrupted, but that might be a way to circumvent.
Well, remember, even if it comes from abroad, it still has to get here through our mail and other related services. And so the people receiving the packages could still be vulnerable. Now, what happened really during COVID was that a lot more pills started coming in, especially from countries like India, and that was helpful for access, but there was a 2 or 3 week delay. Since then, because of these state shield laws, U.S. doctors have had a network where they've been providing the pills, including to red states, much more quickly. That's the kind of legal vulnerability here. them in particular and the people they are serving. And then, but there is just this question about like mass surveillance, right? I mean, among lots of reasons why the Comstock Act has not been enforced is like what it would take to do it. You have to have people really like inspecting the mail in this mass way that just like, at least I think to me, seems extremely unsettling. On the other hand, I think, what abortion opponents would count on is that once you have a few highly publicized cases of these kinds of prosecutions, that would create a deterrence effect. And then even if, sure, you could still order the pills from India, women would be very reluctant to do that.
Right. Well, but presumably those high-profile prosecutions are of doctors and providers who are going to lose their license. Do you think they're really going to go after women who get abortions? That would be...
I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, look, Jonathan Mitchell, who's a lawyer who's been one of the architects of various lawsuits and also SB 8, the law in Texas that diminished access even before Dobbs, he has said the Comstock Act is so useful to us, we don't need a ban, right? Because that's like another thing. I mean, Republicans are going to be under pressure if they have a trifecta of control to pass a national abortion ban of some sort. But, using prosecution as a tool is another way of like cowing people and trying to really diminish access. I mean, look, if you're really, it does seem like, David, it should be out of bounds to be prosecuting women. But like, if you really wanted to stop people from having abortions, that is something that you would do.
Before we go to chatter, can I just say something which I realized I forgot to say? It's not something I'm hopeful about, but it's just an observation, which is that I do think Trump's capacity to break a lot of things in government and to make government work worse and to cause misery for certain kinds of people and to make the world more unstable, it's profound. It is like really huge. And I expect the world to be a very different place in the next 4 years than I would like it to be. That is true. I also still believe that he alone has the charisma to carry off this kind of craziness. I don't think that in 4 years there's going to be another Trump-like figure in the Republican Party who can capture the imagination in the same way. I think Trump is unique in his brazenness, his psychopathy, his sense of humor, his huge global celebrity that predates his political power. And so I'm not saying that the Republican Party wouldn't stay in power or that there won't be Republican presidents or that they might not be incredibly effective and excellent at doing the things that Republicans want. I just don't think that we're going to get a repeat of what Trump is anytime soon. I think he is a unique phenomenon. That is my prediction. But with that in mind, let's go to cocktail chatter. I literally took an edible on election night, late on election night, to try to go to sleep. It did not work. I also had a cocktail, but this weekend I will be having cocktails. I'm going to a wedding, and I would like to be chattering with people. If you were at that wedding with me, Emily Bazelon, what would you be chattering about?
I am reading a new book called The Icon and the Idealist. It's by Stephanie Gorton, and it's about two women, Margaret Sanger and Mary Ware Dennett, who are crucial to bringing birth control to America in the beginning of the 20th century. I am ready to be 100 years in the past at a moment of social change in the direction toward reproductive freedom. And I'm going to interview Stephanie for Gabfest Reads, our book segment next week. So I'm just diving into this book. But if you're looking to escape the present and you want to read about some like really iconoclastic, difficult women and their rivalry with each other, and how that actually fueled this push for social change, this book looks good. The Icon and the Idealist.
JD, what is your chatter?
I'm happy in the, seeking diversion. You know me, find me at the coffee shop, examining the shape of the table. But Shetland, the British procedural, is the 9th episode of that is being released on the 8th of November. So that's going to be a good season 9 of it is good. And if you haven't watched seasons 1 through 8, I recommend the soothing and mildly challenging, but not massive slashery narratives of Shetland. I also like the book, by the way. The book Legendborn was a great diversion too, if anybody's looking for a long diversionary read. It's by Tracy Deonn, Deonn. It's about a young woman at college who discovers after her mother's death something about her heritage through, it's a fantasy novel, through interaction with an Arthurian secret society at the University of North Carolina. And that's about all I'll tell. Lots of magical, fantastical things take place. And it's a gallop that diverts your attention.
I have two quick chatters. One is actually it's a slightly visual chatter for John and Emily. So I have this amazing dead tree in my backyard. Or dead. This is a good question. Is it a dead tree? Is it not a dead tree? I rent a house, and before we moved into our house, there was a huge tree in our backyard. Huge, and it's one of these massive trees that actually has like 4 separate trunks that grow out of a single bottom root system. And a couple of years ago, it fell over, and they actually had to clip off the tree. They didn't remove the tree fully. They've just left 20 feet of trunk. And so you have this kind of bare trunk that goes up 20 feet, and there are these actually 4 splitting trunks. And it's just a dead trunk in my backyard. So weirdly, completely dead. But this summer, it began sprouting branches. And so there are branches everywhere. There are about 100 branches that emerge from this trunk. Can I just show you guys this?
I look forward to it.
I think you're going to need to take a picture and post it somewhere.
Okay.
As well.
Can you see that trunk which has leaves on it?
Yeah.
Like 20 feet high?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sprouted all these branches. This tree sprouted all these branches, and leaves came out of it, but it's a dead tree. And so there are hundreds of branches that have emerged from this dead tree. And at some point, like once a week or so, one of these branches, which each of the branches may be 4 feet long, it falls off dead. And I assume that by winter, it will be bare again. Each of these branches aren't big enough to kind of become a full branch. They just will die deciduously and fall off. But what I don't understand is this tree dead or is it not dead? I do not feel like it can reemerge with full branches and it can fully feed itself. And yet here it persists in living 2 years after it was killed. I don't understand it. What is going on with this tree? And
but it's not a new tree growing out of the husk of the dead one.
No, it's all growing out from these dead these trunks that are just sitting there, which appear by all measures to be dead and which are, cut off. There's no tree canopy that would be feeding the tree. I don't understand what it is. It's very mysterious. If any arborist who listens to this can explain to me why this dead trunk continues to sprout branches and leaves, and it's like you cut off someone's leg and then a toe grew out of the stump or something. That's the way I feel about it. And I'm baffled. So let me know. The other thing I want to chatter about, I sent this to you guys. I read, I thought the greatest paragraph I've ever read this week. And it's by Lindy West. Can I just read this paragraph to you in case you didn't look at it? So Lindy West, the feminist, and this is apparently from her book, The Witches Are Coming, but it was sent around just as an example of great writing. My husband plays the trumpet, which is a sort of loud pretzel originally invented to blow down the walls of fucking Jericho, and later to let Civil War soldiers know it was time to kill each other in a river while you chilled eating pigeon in your officer's tent 20 miles away. Yet somehow, in modern times, it has become socially acceptable to toot the bad cone inside your house before 10 a.m. because, quote, it's your job, and your wife should, quote, get up. What a world. If one was feeling uncharitable, one might describe the trumpet as a machine where you put in compressed air and divorce comes out. But despite operating a piece of biblical demolition equipment inside the home every bright, cold morning of his wife's one and only life, the trumpet is not the most annoying thing about my husband.
Oh, I love that. That last sentence reminds me a little bit of the famous college essay, which might even be apocryphal, where the writer talks about all that they have achieved in life, including making 15-minute brownies in 5 minutes. And then the last sentence is, but I have not yet gone to college. That was wonderful. What was remind us again of who that was?
Lindy West in The Witches Are Coming. Listeners, you have chattered to us. Thank you for improving my morale by emailing chatters to us at gabfest@slate.com, something that is keeping you entertained and diverted. And our listener chatter this week is from Jonas in Boston, talking about a book that I love on a podcast that I love.
Hello, Political Gabfest. This is Jonas in Boston. My chatter is about a podcast series discussing The Power Broker and the Fall of New York by Robert Caro. Published 50 years ago, this Pulitzer Prize-winning book, massive in size, 1,280 pages, and massive in achievement, details the life of Robert Moses, his huge impact on the Big Apple, and the many politicians and personalities he dealt with. The podcast is called 99% Invisible, and its hosts Roman Mars and Elliot Kalin talk about the book with a different guest on each of its 12 episodes, starting with an extensive interview with Robert Caro himself. Subsequent conversation partners include Jamel Bowie, AOC, and Pete Buttigieg, among others. As a native New Yorker, listening to this podcast series has been a lot of fun for me, but I recommend it highly to anyone interested in learning about some fascinating history.
That's all for our episode this week, but we also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about particular, in Slate Plus bonus episode, particular local elections or smaller elections that caught our attention this week, things that were underneath the national radar. Slate Plus members, of course, you get so much good stuff for your subscription. Bonus episodes, discounts to live shows like our live show in Brooklyn, or chance to hang out with us at a cocktail party at that live show in Brooklyn. You don't hit the paywall on the Slate site, much more. And if you are a member, thank you. Enjoy it. If you're not a member, go to slate.com/gabfest plus to become a member today. You can subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify too. That's our show for today. The Gabfest is produced by Cheyna Roth. Our researcher is Julie Huygen, who did her civic duty. Julie, thank you so much for working the polls in your home state. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. Alicia Montgomery is the VP of Audio for Slate. For my most beloved Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. I can't wait to talk to you next week. Yeah, well, can I wait? I can wait.